there, Shalom and welcome to the Cracked Pot channel. In this video, we are going to look into the life of an outcast, a prostitute's son who Yah, which is a shortened form of the name of God, empowered to be a leader and deliverer. He had a hard life, and one of his choices made it even worse. And it is the topic of much controversy. The viewpoint presented in this video will be much different than what is traditionally taught. So let's get started. You can find out about Jephthah's life in the book of Judges, which is also a specific period of time in the history of Israel. The time of the Judges lasted from the death of Joshua, continuing through to the reign of Israel's first king, King Saul. This time period lasted approximately 300 years and is considered to be the darkest period in the time of Israel's history. One of the main reasons for this was that the Israelite people did not fully drive out all of the enemy nations out of the land as God has commanded, and so they became ensnared by the worship of the Canaanite gods, which always involved child sacrifice and other detestable things. When the people would repent and cry out to God, He would raise up a judge. There are 12 judges mentioned in the book of Judges, 6 major judges and 6 minor. The difference between a major or minor judge was not the length of time they ruled, but rather how much space they take up in the scriptures, much like the major and minor prophets. Some major judges you may be familiar with are Samson, Gideon, and Deborah. Jephthah is also considered a major judge. Now, a judge is not like what we think of in our culture today. The judge in this time period and culture was a deliverer and a military leader over the people, not someone in a black robe presiding over a courtroom. Let's listen to Judges chapter 2, verses 18 through 19, where it talks about what is going on before we get into learning more about Jephthah.
And when the Lord raised up judges for them, the Lord was with the judge, and delivered them out of the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For the Lord was moved to pity by their groaning, because of those who oppressed them and harassed them. And it came to pass, when the judge was dead, that they reverted and behaved more corruptly than their fathers, by following other gods to serve them and bow down to them. They did not cease from their own doings, nor from their stubborn way.
Jephthah in Hebrew is pronounced as Yiftach and means he opens. He was from the tribe of Gad, which came from Jacob and Leah's servant Zilpah, whom she gave to Jacob as a concubine to bear children. After the exodus from Egypt, the Gadites were one of 3 tribes, including the tribe of Reuben and half of the tribe of Manasseh, that wanted to stay east of the Jordan River to settle, while all the other tribes and the second half of Manasseh settled west of the river. We are going to be covering what the scriptures have to say about Jephthah's life, found in Judges chapter 11 and part of 12. Judges 11:1. Now Jephthah the Gileadite was a mighty son of valor. He was the son of a prostitute, and Gilead was his father. The name Gilead represents the entire mountainous and hilly region of the northern part of the Transjordan. Many towns resided in this area where mainly the tribe of Gad has settled. This region is now in the country Jordan. Jephthah's father, bearing the name Gilead, would be tied to leadership of the area and wealth. Jephthah's mother was a prostitute, but it seems his father Gilead took Jephthah in to raise him. Judges 11:2. And Gilead's wife bore him sons who grew up, drove Jephthah out, and said to him, "You shall have no inheritance in our father's house, because you are the son of another woman." So the half-brothers he grew up with, upon first opportunity at the father's death, drive Jephthah out of the family home and rob him of any inheritance. Judges 11:3. So Jephthah fled from his brothers and settled in the land of Tob, where worthless men gathered around him and traveled with him. This land of Tob was known to be on the outskirts of civilization. Think of it as a hideout or a lair for men of shady character. And the traveling with him in Hebrew actually alludes to raiding areas with him. So now Jephthah, fleeing from his brothers, implies that his life was in danger. This scenario should bring to mind another person in the Bible, David, who had to flee from King Saul, who wanted to kill him. And in the process, men gathered to him as well. 1 Samuel 22:2. And everyone who was in distress, everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was discontented gathered to him. So he became captain over them, and there were about 400 men with him. These were not cream of the crop men that gathered around David, much like the men that were drawn to Jephthah. But these men will become loyal military assets. Judges 11:4-6. Sometime later, when the Ammonites fought against Israel and made war with them, the elders of Gilead went to get Jephthah from the land of Tob. "Come," they said, "be our commander so that we can fight against the Ammonites." Jephthah's fighting skills have been recognized and must be truly outstanding considering who the elders were. Let's see Jephthah's response. Judges 11:7. Jephthah replied to the elders of Gilead, "Did you not hate me and expel me from my father's house? Why then have you come to me now when you are in distress?" Seems that these elders or leaders of the area are none other than his brothers who ran him off years ago. Isn't it interesting how everything has come full circle, and now Jephthah's brothers are begging him for help? We can once again see a parallel in another person's life. That would be Joseph, whose half-brothers sold him as a slave, and then years later, they needed his help. It's a fact that mixed families and sibling rivalry issues have been around for a very long time. It is also true that we can see Yah's hand in justice and whom he chooses to lead. Men may thwart it for a season, as in the case of Joseph, David, and even Jephthah, but Yah's plan will always triumph. In Jephthah's case, the elders state that he will not only lead the army, but they will appoint him leader of the entire area. Of course, Jephthah does not trust them very much. He's going to make sure that they seal the deal. So we're going to listen to that in Judges chapter 11, verses 8 through 11.
That is why we have turned again to you now, that you may go with us and fight against the people of Ammon, and be our head over all the inhabitants of Gilead.
If you take me back home to fight against the people of Ammon, and the Lord delivers them to me, shall I be your head?
The Lord will be a witness between us, if we do not do according to your words.
Then Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead, and the people made him head and commander over them. And Jephthah spoke all his words before the Lord in Mizpah.
Now that he's in charge, he sends a message to the king of the Ammonites, demanding to know why he is attacking. That king explains that it was his ancestors' territory before Israel took it over. Jephthah writes back, giving a history lesson and explaining that the Ammonites made the choice to attack Israel instead of letting them pass through the region, and that it's been over 300 years since they have possessed the land. Think about it. We recently celebrated Independence Day in the U.S., and it hasn't even been 300 years since July 4th, 1776. Let's listen to a part of Jephthah's message to the Ammonite king.
Then Israel sent messengers to Sihon, king of the Amorites, king of Heshbon. And Israel said to him, "Please, let us pass through your land into our place." But Sihon did not trust Israel to pass through his territory. So Sihon gathered all his people together, encamped in Jahaz, and fought against Israel. And the Lord God of Israel delivered Sihon and all his people into the land of Israel, and they defeated them. Thus, Israel gained possession of all the land of the Amorites who inhabited that country. They took possession of all the territory of the Amorites, from the Arnon to the Jabbok, and from the wilderness to the Jordan. And now, the Lord God of Israel has dispossessed the Amorites from before his people Israel. Should you then possess it? Will you not possess whatever Chemosh, your God, gives you to possess? So whatever the Lord our God takes possession of before us, we will possess. And now, are you any better than Balak, the son of Zippor, king of Moab? Did he ever strive against Israel? Did he ever fight against them? While Israel dwelt in Heshbon and its villages, in Aroer and its villages, and in all the cities along the banks of the Arnon. For 300 years, why did you not recover them within that time? Therefore, I have not sinned against you, but you wronged me by fighting against me. May the Lord, the judge, render judgment this day between the children of Israel and the people of Ammon.
So the king of the Ammonites is not going to listen to anything Jephthah says. It will be war, and now Yah gets involved. Judges 11:29. Then the spirit of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh came upon Jephthah, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh, and passed through Mizpah of Gilead, and from Mizpah of Gilead he advanced towards the people of Ammon. It's important to notice this part in light of what we are about to cover next. The Spirit of God came upon Jephthah to accomplish Yah's purpose. Jephthah does indeed defeat the Ammonites, and remember what we heard in Judges chapter 2, verse 18, that Yah was with the judge the entire time the judge lived. And with this in mind, let's examine what is known as Jephthah's rash vow. Still in Judges 11, this is verses 30 and 31. And Jephthah made a vow to Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, if you give the Ammonites into my hands, whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in triumph from the Ammonites will be Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. And I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering. The first part of the vow is that whatever comes out will be Yah's. The second part is that it will be a burnt offering. He is obviously expecting a sheep or goat or another form of livestock. It was common to care for some animals within the houses, and some dwellings were set up with the lower parts containing animals and upper parts were the dwelling for humans. He in no way thinks it will be a person, as Moses had given explicit instructions found in Deuteronomy 18 that there was to be no one among the people who practiced fire sacrifice of humans. Jephthah thinks he's being honorable in his asking for help, but it's not an animal that greets him. Continuing in verse 34, when Jephthah returned to his home in Mizpah, who should come out to meet him but his daughter, dancing to the sound of timbrels? She was an only child. Except for her, he had neither son nor daughter. This is not good. Jephthah had no way of knowing that his daughter would come out of the door, as it was custom in that day for all of the women and girls to gather at the gate to dance and sing to celebrate any wartime victory. Scholars put Jephthah's daughter anywhere between the ages of 11 to 13, as by 13 most girls were betrothed to marry. And if betrothed, she would belong to another, and the vow would be instantly negated. It might have been a surprise for her father that she had planned as to her reason for being home. Talk about a happy moment gone sour quick. This is a picture of a hand-painted timbrel, which was an ancient percussion instrument similar to a tambourine. Her friends were probably behind her, coming to celebrate Jephthah's victory, as girls often danced together. Verse 35. As soon as Jephthah saw her, he tore his clothes and said, "No, not my daughter. You have brought me to my knees. You have brought great misery upon me, for I have given my word to Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh and cannot take it back." What a tragedy. This is the end of Jephthah's lineage, as he will have no son-in-law or grandchildren. Once the vow was made, it had to be kept. The vow is that whatever came out first would belong to God. In Numbers chapter 30, verses 1 and 2, it explains more about vows and how important they are. Let's read from that. Then Moses spoke to the heads of the tribes concerning the children of Israel, saying, "This is the thing which Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh has commanded. If a man makes a vow to Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh or swears an oath to bind himself by some agreement, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth." The next question would be, is child sacrifice as a burnt offering an acceptable sacrifice to Yah? After all, Jephthah said he would, so he has to do it, right? This is where many of those who teach about Jephthah seriously miss it and teach that he burned his child to a heap of ashes. And so, in defense of Jephthah, let's examine the facts. First, we must remember who he is. He's not a random Israelite who is doing whatever is right in his own eyes. He is a judge. He is someone God specifically chose and raised up. Jephthah is someone who the Spirit of God landed upon, and also he is someone who Yah will be with until he dies. Yah has some very strong opinions on burning children in sacrifices. He's not just going to pat Jephthah on the head and say, "You meant well, so it's okay that you put your daughter in the fire for my sake." I don't think so. Deuteronomy 12:31. You shall not worship Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, in that way, for every abomination to Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, which he hates, they have done to their gods. For they burn even their sons and daughters in the fire to their gods. So this is a verse that clearly says God doesn't like it, he hates it, it's an abomination, he does not want it. Here's another one. Jeremiah 32:35. And they built the high places of Baal, which are in the valley of the son of Hinnom, to cause their sons and their daughters to pass through the fire to Molech, which I did not command them, nor did it come into my mind that they should do this abomination to cause Judah to sin. All right, let's continue with Jephthah. We are in verse 36 of chapter 11. My father, she replied, you have given your word to Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. Do to me just as you promised, now that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh has avenged you of your enemies, the Ammonites. She is pretty calm for knowing that she's going to be burned alive if we are to believe the nonsense that is taught on this subject. Verse 37. But grant me this one request, she said. Give me 2 months to roam the hills and weep with my friends, because I will never marry. Give me 2 months, for I'm about to die. My life will be cut short. I'm going to be burned alive. Is this what she says? Nope. The point is that she will not marry. That is what she's weeping about. That is what she is upset about. It is kind of a moot point being upset about not marrying if death is imminent. Judges 11:38. You may go, he said, and he let her go for 2 months. She and her friends went into the hills and wept because she would never marry. Notice it does not say they wept because she would die by being sacrificed in the fire. The emphasis is marriage, virginity, and therefore no family or children. Moving on to verse 39. And it was so at the end of 2 months that she returned to her father, and he carried out his vow with her, which he had vowed. She remained a virgin. Some translations will say she knew no man. Who cares if she's dead and burnt up into ashes? The emphasis, and I'm being intentionally repetitive here, is on the marrying and having children. Now, there was a practice in Israel of dedicating a child to Yah for a vow. This child was served for an entire lifetime and many times would not marry. Can we see an example of a child being given to Yah? Yes, we can. Let's listen to the vow found in 1 Samuel chapter 1.
So Hannah arose after they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat by the doorpost of the tabernacle of the Lord, and she was in bitterness of soul, and prayed to the Lord and wept in anguish. Then she made a vow.
O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your maidservant, and remember me, and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a male child, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall come upon his head.
So God answers Hannah's prayer and gives her a son, whom she named Samuel. And when Samuel is weaned, which was probably around ages 4 or 5, Hannah keeps her vow and takes Samuel to Eli to be in Yah's service for the rest of Samuel's life. This is what also happened to Jephthah's daughter. All right, let's listen to the second part of Hannah and Samuel's story when she takes him to Eli and he begins his service to Yah.
Now when she had weaned him, she took him up with her, with 3 bulls, 1 ephah of flour, and a skin of wine, and brought him to the house of the Lord in Shiloh. And the child was young. Then they slaughtered a bull, and brought the child to Eli.
Oh, my Lord, as your soul lives, my Lord, I am the woman who stood by you here, praying to the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me my petition which I asked of him. Therefore, I also have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he shall be lent to the Lord.
So they worshiped the Lord there.
Now back to Jephthah. Judges chapter 11:40. From this comes the Israelite tradition that each year the young women of Israel go out for 4 days to commemorate the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite. This is a strange verse break, as verse 39 actually ends with, "From this comes the Israelite tradition," and then picks up in verse 40 that each year. Weird. In the original Hebrew, there are no chapters and verses, so why the translators cut this sentence in half, I have no clue. But I put the end of verse 39 on here with verse 40, which is actually the last verse of chapter 11. Now, in Hebrew, the each year, which is Jamima, shows it is something that occurs each year, is the exact same wording of Hannah's actual visit to Samuel at Shiloh. The translators also chose the Hebrew letter lamed as a prefix to mean about when attached to the daughter, which could easily be the prefix to the daughter of Jephthah. What does this mean? Well, it means that the text can say, The women of Israel went every year to commemorate for 4 days to the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite. Why? Because she was still alive. Some translations use lament, but to commemorate or reenact is a better translation. These women were like Hannah, who visited her son Samuel. They went yearly for a 4-day visit to visit Jephthah's daughter. Now, perhaps there are some of you who are still clinging to what your pastor or some other teacher taught you about Jephthah sacrificing his daughter. In Defense of Jephthah, who I believe made an impulsive vow that cost him his daughter and has gotten a bum rap for being accused of something he did not do, here's one more proof. We have a famous chapter in the New Testament called the Hall of Faith. It lists people who are awesome heroes of the faith. None of them were perfect, but they were all outstanding for their faith. And I believe, since Jephthah is listed among them, there is absolutely no way he would be honored if he killed his child in such an evil way. He is found in Hebrews chapter 11. Let's listen to it, verses 32 through 34.
And what more shall I say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, also of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, became valiant in battle, turned to flight the armies of the aliens.
Normally, this is where the teaching stops about Jephthah, but there is a little bit more to discover in chapter 12 of Judges, and it is very interesting. The book of Judges is actually a collaboration, so when we learn about a particular event, we must not think that the entire region was experiencing the oppression of the enemy that each story says that they were facing. This is made very clear when the Ephraimites were ticked off that they weren't included in the recent war that Jephthah won. They threatened to kill him and thus began a tribal war. Jephthah is going to come up with an ingenious way that has to do with a different way of pronouncing a word in Hebrew to flush out the Ephraimites. Now we're going to listen to the first part of Judges 12, and this is verses 1 through 4.
Then the men of Ephraim gathered together, crossed over toward Zaphon, and said to Jephthah,
"Why did you cross over to fight against the people of Ammon and did not call us to go with you? We will burn your house down on you with fire."
And Jephthah said to them,
My people and I were in a great struggle with the people of Ammon, and when I called you, you did not deliver me out of their hands. So when I saw that you would not deliver me, I took my life in my hands and crossed over against the people of Ammon, and the Lord delivered them into my hand. Why then have you come up to me this day to fight against me?
Now Jephthah gathered together all the men of Gilead and fought against Ephraim. And the men of Gilead defeated Ephraim, because they said,
"You Gileadites are fugitives of Ephraim, among the Ephraimites and among the Manassites."
Thousands are going to lose their lives because they pronounce a word differently. Now, in the U.S., we do the same thing. How do you pronounce this word? Is it caramel, like in the South, or is it caramel, like in the North? How about this? Is this Route 77 or Route 77? And this one, is it syrup or syrup? It's mind-blowing to realize how many men lost their lives just because they couldn't pronounce a word, the same way as other speakers of Hebrew, like the Gileadites did. We are finishing up Jephthah's story in verses 5 through 7.
The Gileadites seized the fords of the Jordan before the Ephraimites arrived. And when any Ephraimite who escaped said, "Let me cross over," the men of Gilead would say to him, "Are you an Ephraimite?" If he said no, then they would say to him, "Then say Shibboleth." And he would say Sibboleth, for he could not pronounce it right. Then they would take him and kill him at the fords of the Jordan. There fell at that time 42,000 Ephraimites. And Jephthah judged Israel 6 years. Then Jephthah the Gileadite died, and was buried in among the cities of Gilead.
Jephthah did not live too long after these wars, as he only lived 6 more years. Who knows if the heartbreak of losing his daughter was a factor. We can learn some really important things from his life. First, God is no respecter of persons. It doesn't matter what your background is, what your ancestry is, who your parents are, how others see you or treat you. You can do mighty things for God's kingdom. Second, it will require forgiveness, as if Jephthah had not made peace with his brothers, he would have lost out on the opportunity to help Israel against her enemies. He is honored among many heroes of the faith. And lastly, it is important not to make a vow in haste. How many times have we made vows and not kept them? For example, "Oh God, if you will heal my child, then I will." Or, "God, please help me. If you will just help me, then I will." You fill in the blank. Or, "Father, save my marriage, and I promise to." You know, there are so many ways to make a vow. And especially when we are in a desperate situation. The problem is, a lot of us forget what we said, but God has not forgotten. I encourage anyone who made a vow and not kept it to ask for forgiveness and strive to keep what you promised. Hope you enjoyed the video about the outcast judge. We did another study on a judge who had a deformity. I'll put a link in the description for that video, or you can find it in the playlist on biblical people and look for Ehud, God's left-handed assassin. Please pass this along to anyone who thinks Jephthah sacrificed his daughter in the fire, or perhaps it's just someone who you think will enjoy this video. Thanks so much for watching. May Abba Shamayim, our Heavenly Father, bless you and lift you up in any situation where you feel unaccepted and like an outcast, and bring you into your rightful destiny.